To those of you who were freshmen this year, I know that this wasn't the freshman year that you dreamed of. You'll certainly have some amazing memories as a result of this year, but thank you for sticking with us. Thank you for everything that you've done. To those of you who are seniors, congratulations on your achievement. We are so proud of you. And although the graduation ceremony will be delayed until December, we are celebrating with you through social media this spring, and we are thrilled with your accomplishments. You know, for continuing students, thank you for being a part of the Emporia State family. We are so grateful that you have joined Emporia State and so proud of you for everything that you are doing to complete your college degree. We look forward to continuing to serve you this fall and in the semesters to come until you finish your degree. And to our international students, we really miss you, and we look forward to having you back on campus this fall. And to our student athletes, I am so sorry that so many of you did not get to have your season or finish your competition. But I want you to know how proud we are of all of you and how grateful we are that you are all a part of the Hornet Nation. And now, joining me today, I'd like to introduce our provost, Dr. David Cordle. As you probably know, Dr. Cordle is in charge of the academic experience here at Emporia State. So Dr. Cordle, welcome.
Thank you very much, President Garrett. Welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining us today.
To our faculty, let me just say how amazed I am at everything you were able to accomplish this semester. When you transition from face-to-face teaching to online teaching in the middle of a semester, it's a little bit like building a race car while it's barreling down the tracks. And you have finished the semester well, and we're very pleased at what a great job you did. And I'm amazed at the creativity that you demonstrated in supporting your students. Things like virtual senior shows or instruction, been amazing opportunities for our students. So thank you, faculty, for everything that you've done. And then finally, to our staff, thank you. There are no words that are enough to say thank you for everything you have done to support the faculty and the students as we have made this huge transition from face-to-face to remote learning. I'd like to say a special thank you to a number of our staff who have continued to work on campus during this time, to our police department, our facilities crew, our information technology professionals, and our professionals in residence life and other areas of campus. We are grateful that you have continued to support our operations here on campus during this time. And there are so many other staff members who have continued to work remotely to support our faculty and support our students. Areas like advising, counseling, registration, financial aid, and more have all moved online and all continue to support our students and our faculty and staff. But at this time, I also wanted to give a special thank you to a group called the Emergency Planning Group. And as soon as we realized back in March that a resumption of face-to-face instruction might not be in the cards following spring break, we brought together a group that is called the Emergency Planning Group. Emergency planning as a function is under Dr. Jim Williams, our Vice President for Student Affairs. And Dr. Williams did a phenomenal job of working with the Emergency Planning Group to assure that we were making decisions and getting those decisions communicated out to all of you in a timely fashion. And I can't say enough to those who served on the Emergency Planning Group and to Dr. Williams for serving as the chair of that group. But a huge thank you goes out to all of them. I think most of you are aware on some level of the many ways in which Emporia State has been supporting not only our students and our faculty and our staff, but also the community. And I wanted to take just a moment to share some of those ways with you. To our students, you may be using Corky's Cupboard now. It's continuing, it's still open. It has reduced hours, so you'll want to check on those hours. Our health clinic and our counseling services continue to provide student help as well. The university has gone into the business of manufacturing masks and nasal swabs. Never thought I'd be doing a town hall where I use the phrase nasal swabs, but nasal swabs, to help with our healthcare professionals and to also help keep all of us safe. We've also been doing things like pushing out a Spotify list of some great music, and the bells on campus have not only been playing the alma mater, but have been playing some inspirational songs over the last few weeks, like Ode to Joy and America the Beautiful. And many of you may have seen the social media about Emporia State's lights. We have some lights that we typically only illuminate during the holidays, like a big star on the front of Plum Hall or the lights on Worcester Bridge. And those lights are staying on until you all are back with us. Sounds a little bit like a Motel 6 commercial, I know, but we are so happy that we're able to provide that little bit of brightness to our community by keeping the lights on. And our athletic teams and many of our students have continued to provide community service. You know, that's something that here at Emporia State, we take very seriously. We are about changing lives for the common good. And our community service activities are phenomenal. In fact, I think I heard just a couple of weeks ago that our cheer team was ranked #1 in the nation in Division II for community service hours. So congratulations to all of you. But throughout all of this, I know that everyone has had an increased level of stress, an increased level of uncertainty, maybe concern for your own health or the health of your loved ones. And we are thinking about all of you. The governor has just in the last few days laid out a path forward for Kansas. And like all of you, I'm ready to get back to a more normal way of life. So last Thursday, Emporia State publicly stated our intention to resume face-to-face classes for fall. But there are still plans to be made and precautions to be taken. And we hope at some point over the summer that we can begin an orderly process to transition our employees back to campus. Some of you will remember Donald Rumsfeld, and many of you will not remember him, but he served as the Secretary of Defense under 2 different presidents over the course of several decades. And one of the things that he is well known for is the following quote, and I'm going to take just a moment to read it to you. There are known knowns, that is the things we know we know. We also know that there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know that there are some things we don't know. But there are also unknown unknowns, the ones that we don't know, we don't know. And I think that's a good way to look at this time that we're in right now. We know a lot of things about COVID-19 at this point in time, but there are some things we don't know. And there are some things that over the next several months we'll be working on. I'm not going to pretend that I have all the answers today, because we don't yet. We still have weeks of planning ahead of us. Much of this planning is going to be led by a group called the Fall Planning Group, which includes representatives from key areas throughout campus. In addition to the Fall Planning Group, different areas on campus will have their own planning groups. For example, in academics, the Provost's Council will be doing much of the planning for the academic endeavors here at Emporia State. In residence life, They'll be working on planning as well and doing a lot of that planning in cooperation with residence life employees from other universities around the state. One of the individuals who is going to be very involved in our planning is our provost, Dr. David Cordle. David, thank you so much for your leadership of the faculty. And I'll give you just a moment to say anything that you would like to say before we begin to address some of the questions that we've been asked.
Thank you, President Garrett. And I think the real thanks go to the faculty members who have gotten us through a difficult semester, and to the staff members who support their work in our academic departments. We're very appreciative of what they've done.
Certainly are, and certainly thankful to our students who have made that transition with us. Now, many of you have already submitted questions. I'm going to cover those questions. It says I'm muted by the host. Now I'm muted by the host. Many of you have already submitted questions online, and we are going to cover those questions to the extent that we can today. But keep in mind, some of those questions will require additional study. Some of the questions may be specific to a particular individual, and some of the questions may have been asked multiple times in multiple ways by different people. And so we will try to answer the questions as well as we can. If they're specific to a very small group of people or one individual, we'll likely not get to that today. And then there are some questions where, as we move forward, we realize we've got a lot more study to do. So let me just share a little bit about how to provide questions to us. If you have questions, you can use the Q&A feature to ask questions today. As I noted, many of you have already submitted questions. And let me also then mention that for questions that we don't get to today, or that you think of later, there's another way for you to submit your questions. And let me just tell you that the more questions you submit, the more thoughtful we can be as we move forward toward planning for the fall. If you want to submit a question that you think of at a later point in time, what you'll want to do is to go to the COVID-19 web page for Emporia State University. There's an FAQ area in that web page. Now, you may want to look through the FAQs to see whether your question has already been answered. But if you don't see it, there's a button on that page that you can follow so that you can submit a question for answer later. Now, let me mention one other thing, and that is that whatever fall looks like, and of course we hope that it will look very much like a normal fall, we have to follow all of the federal, the state, and the local guidance. We have no choice about that, and we want to be very careful to follow any guidance that we receive from the government very carefully. Now, we're going to begin going through these questions. We have a moderator who will ask some questions, but please remember, as we answer to the best of our ability today, that this is a very fluid situation. We don't have all the answers right now, and it may take us a few weeks before we are able to fully and completely answer some of these questions. And with that, I believe we are ready for our first question from our moderator.
Our first question has to do with the CARES Act and what we know about that and what we can share at this point. Okay,
thank you. Now, I know our students have heard a lot about the CARES Act funding, and the good news is a substantial portion of the CARES Act funding is headed for you. The relief that Emporia State will receive under the CARES Act will be about $1.7 million that we can then distribute to our students. Now, it's taken a while for the Department of Education to provide us with all of the guidance that we need, but we're close, we think, to having all of the guidance we need on how we can accomplish that distribution. Let me share a little bit that is more specific about what our plans are, who's covered, because some students are covered and some are not, and what that will look like over the next few weeks. So the primary focus under the CARES Act is the group of students who are Pell eligible students. If you are a Pell eligible student, meaning you've received money from the federal government under the Pell program, you do not need to apply for additional emergency funding under the CARES Act. We will transfer to you $1,200 directly. So if your bank account is up to date with ESU, we can transfer it directly. Otherwise, we will mail a check to the mailing address you have on file with us. So please make sure that your information is current. So much of the 1.7 million that is going to our students will be going to those Pell eligible students. The remaining funding will be provided based on an application process to those who have the greatest need. It will be distributed on a first come, first served basis until we have exhausted our funding. And that application will be on the financial aid website in the very near future. So one thing I'd like for you to know about the CARES Act is that it covers payments to students and is intended to help them with the transition to online education. The way that the Department of Education has written that guidance, it is written in such a way that Emporia State may not reimburse you for your loss of off-campus employment. That may change. We've asked for additional guidance on that, but for the time being, the CARES Act funding for which you may be eligible cannot be used to reimburse you for off-campus employment loss. And unfortunately, because of the way that the Federal CARES Act is written, there are some groups of students who are not covered by the CARES funding. Those include our students who are fully online, DACA students, and international students. If you fall into one of these three groups, however, you can apply for emergency funding through a student emergency fund that has been established, and you can also find information about that on the financial aid website. And if you're a faculty or staff member, or maybe a community member who's listening, please do take the time to donate to the CARES Act. I think that hopefully answers most of the CARES Act questions. There is one question that I see that has popped up online asking where the rest of the money will go to. So half of the CARES Act money goes to students, the other half goes to the university itself. And there is a sense in which that funding also went to our students because the bulk of that money was used to reimburse our students for the room and board once they moved out of the dorms this spring. And I think we're ready for our next question.
This is a question about students, faculty, and staff who might have health issues that put them at high risk for COVID-19. How will they continue to be part of the ESU family, and how would they or should they bring these concerns up for follow-up?
Okay, well, I will answer to the best of my ability with respect to faculty and staff, and then ask our provost, David Cordle, to answer with respect to our student group. Faculty and staff who may have health issues are asked to be sure to get in touch with their supervisor if they have concerns. Maybe they're immune compromised or for some reason have a concern about their ability to resume regular face-to-face employment. We will be issuing some guidance in the near future, and we'll call that generally return to work guidance. And one of the things that I want to emphasize is that as we think about particularly our staff who are returning here over the summer, or some faculty who may be returning over the summer, that we are keeping all of our options on the table as far as different ways to transition people back into Emporia State. And of course, we, as I mentioned before, have to be fully compliant with all federal, state, and local guidance. I'll turn it over to Provost Cordle and see whether he has anything he'd like to share with respect to our students.
Well, I do think that it's possible that we may have some students who fall into a high risk group. And for that reason, they may need for us to provide some reasonable accommodations for them. We don't know exactly what that would look like just now, but from what I know of ESU and its history, we have always tried to work with students who had challenges of that kind. So I do believe, and I have some confidence that we will work with them to accommodate them as best we can.
Going along with that, we have several questions specifically about classes this fall. Perhaps Provost might address these. So an overall question is, how will social distancing work in the classroom? And for instance, would students who have already enrolled see a change in their fall schedules? Would ESU take a class that is supposed to have 70 students and go ahead and break it into smaller sections and move students into those?
Well, the course schedule itself might not change. Once we start changing course schedules, that gets pretty complicated. But what I could easily see happening is the possibility that we might need to adjust some of our face-to-face courses because of the requirement of social distancing. It simply might not be possible because of that to put, say, 30 students into a small classroom in tight rows where they're only 2 feet apart. So I think what that means for us is that we have to be ready for that possibility. And it's likely that as our faculty members prepare for fall, they're going to probably need to employ some very flexible course design so that they're ready to use some electronic options and some online options, possibly to supplement what they're doing in the classroom.
Another question about classes and schedules. Does the university have a date by which they would decide for sure about fall? And what happens if we start face-to-face and COVID-19 happens again and we have to switch? How are we going to handle that?
You know, one of our challenges is we all want to plan far in advance, and we want to make our plans and know that once we've made them, they're going to stick. Well, we will plan in advance. And as you know by now, what we're planning for in the fall is to be back on campus and doing face-to-face instruction. But we have to be basically ready for anything. I don't know what the chances are that there could be a disruption to the fall semester that requires us to pivot from face-to-face to online instruction, but it could happen. And I think the reality is we simply are going to have to be ready for that and any number of other possibilities.
Okay. And a follow-up question was asked from our audience. Would a possibility for a class for social distancing be to move it to a larger classroom than it was scheduled for, so there's more room?
That might be an example of the kind of adjustment that we would make. And actually, to the extent that that's available, that would be a pretty simple and pretty easy adjustment. So naturally, we would want to look for the simple things first, but we'll have to be creative as we go into the fall.
Okay. I think now we have a group of questions about employees and how the employees do their jobs. So one of them is for staff that share offices. So maybe 2 people in an office space. Could there be some sort of office sharing where they work out that one is working from home for a week while the other's in the office and then they flip? Is that something that's being considered?
As we go forward with our return to work plan, we'll be looking at all sorts of options. And that's certainly something that could possibly happen. Something like that makes some sense because it would minimize the number of individuals in a particular office area on a particular day. And, you know, that's one of many different options. There may be some phasing in of individuals around campus. I think that's also a possibility. And, you know, different offices, because of the way those offices are laid out, may have different needs. And we'll be looking in every area of the university to try to determine what makes the most sense as far as transitioning those employees back to work on campus. One of the things that will be true is that as we do transition our employees back to on-campus work, we're going to be providing them with notice of that return to face-to-face work or on-campus work. We've said to our employees that we will provide you with at least a week's notice, hopefully more. We'll provide you with training. And as I mentioned, we're likely to phase that in so that some groups of employees might return faster than others, or there may be that scenario like your questioner mentioned, where on some days, maybe Monday, Wednesday, Friday, one person comes in, and Tuesday, Thursday, someone else comes in while the other works from home. And so there's a lot to think about when it comes to how we transition those employees back. I'm going to take just a moment also to mention something, because I saw a question pop up in our Q&A, and that is regarding personal protective equipment for our faculty and staff. I think most of us likely have masks of our own at this point. So you're certainly welcome to use your own mask if you feel comfortable doing that. But as we begin that process of transitioning our employees back to work, we'll be sharing more information about what kind of mask would make sense. If you don't have one, the university will be able to provide something for you. But please do feel free to use your own. You can go to the CDC website if you're a creative person. There's some instructions out there about how to make a mask that is very effective. And if you're a crafty individual, you might want to make 3 or 4 so that you can have a couple in the laundry, but always a couple that are clean for you to wear.
We have faculty and staff who are working parents, and some of them are wondering whether the Center for Early Childhood Education is going to reopen and would be available for daycare if they need to come back to work. They are concerned about where they're going to take their children.
I can try to answer that one, or at least address it to a certain extent. Many of you probably have seen Governor Kelly's reopening plan for the state. And if you did look at that, you'll notice that it's in 3 phases. And one of the things that sort of jumped out at me a bit was that childcare facilities in that plan are actually eligible to continue operating through all 3 phases of that reopening plan. It does use the phrase, though, pursuant to state and local regulations. So obviously there are some very specific ways childcare facilities would have to operate during this transitional reopening for the state. I think what I would offer to you about ESU and its Center for Early Childhood Education is that what happens with CECE really needs to be planned as a part of the overall university return to campus plan. And that's something that will be unfolding over the coming days and weeks. And I just see that as one element of what has to be decided about that whole package.
Our list now moves to athletics. What do we know about athletics at this point?
Well, not as much as we would like, but that's because no one in the country really knows fully what athletics will look like for the fall. Obviously, we are hopeful that we will be able to resume athletic competition in the fall. Emporia State is working very closely with the other schools that are in the MIAA, which is our athletic conference. And our athletic conference will be issuing some guidance regarding what the fall will look like. And again, while we're very hopeful that that will be a fairly normal fall, it is possible that there are other things that will make it somewhat different. Those things might be limiting travel a bit or having fewer contests of various types. And maybe even in the stands at some kinds of events, spreading the fans out. So there are a lot of things that have to be considered. One of the other things I can tell you, though, is that our athletics department takes this very seriously, and they are working hard on development of their own plans for assuring the safety of our student athletes and our fans. Just earlier today, I was listening to Kent Weiser talk about some of the plans for keeping the training room sanitized, assuring that we have very few people in at any given time. We're following all of the guidance that we've received on the best ways to keep those student athletes safe. It's not open yet for use, but the plans are developing, and we're very proud of our athletic staff for everything that they are doing. It is likely that there will be some additional safety precautions in the fall, but again, we don't know all of that yet. The guidance will be coming from our athletic conference, and they are working hard on that at this time.
Students have asked several questions about residential life and what is that going to look like? What will living in the residence halls look like with social distancing guidelines?
Well, our residence life professional staff is fantastic. They're working hard on development of their plans, and they're also coordinating very closely with the residence life staff at all of the other universities that are in the Kansas system. And so what we are doing will likely be very similar to what is happening at the other universities around the state. So right now we're focused on assuring that we've got cleaning and sanitizing protocols, that transitioning to the move-in goes well. Much like the move-out for our students this spring, it was handled very, very well by our staff. We scheduled times, we limited the number of individuals who could come with each student. We sanitized every piece of equipment between one student and the next as we did the move-out. And I would anticipate that the move-in will look very similar during the fall. As to other decisions, those have yet to be made. And if you have questions that are specific to residence life, please do follow Emporia State's FAQ page. And on that page where it asks for additional questions, feel free to submit the questions there, or you can submit the questions to Cass Coughlin, who is in charge of residential life here at Emporia State.
We had a question submitted that I think plays into residential life, but actually all across campus. Will ESU do anything about testing people on their way into buildings, taking temperatures or anything like that, applying to faculty and students, residence halls, campus buildings?
So the fall planning group is working on plans and processes for a number of different scenarios. And testing is one aspect that we've seen used nationally a great deal. And that's something that the fall planning group is looking at. The other three aspects of assuring that there is safety include contact tracing at times when needed, isolation, and then finally quarantine. And again, all of those are when they are needed, and the fall planning group is beginning to look at what testing could look like in the fall and whether that is necessary this fall.
Following up on that, we know that right now people are dealing with having COVID-19 and recovering from it. So at some point, we're probably going to have COVID-19 survivors on campus. What kind of advice do you have on how these people could avoid stigma or people fearing being around them?
Yeah, that's a great question, very thoughtful question. And, you know, I think for fall, as we look forward, most of us will expect to operate in much the same way that we've been operating for the last couple of months. Washing hands frequently, wearing a mask, and I think all of us will be doing that. And I personally don't know of individuals who are on our campus who have dealt with COVID-19, but I would be shocked if we didn't have some who had COVID-19, and we've certainly seen it across the country impacting many, many people. My hope would be that Emporia State will continue to be the kind of welcoming place that it always has been, and that there would not be stigma associated with having had the virus. And if we become aware that we have some challenges in that area, then as a campus, we will have to work through those challenges. But Emporia State has been a campus where people have been, for the most part, very, very respectful of one another's feelings. And I would hope that that would continue into the fall as well.
Our next question actually goes backwards to the spring semester that we're just finishing. And this question is, will there be any type of compensation to student accounts because they paid full tuition and the last half of the semester was online only?
Well, that's an excellent question. And certainly I think for our students and for our faculty as well, the transition to online was not something any of us really wanted. One thing that may not be immediately clear to students is that it's actually more expensive for us to offer online instruction as opposed to the face-to-face instruction. And normally for our online classes, we actually have a charge of $30 that is applied when individuals are taking online classes. That's when they, you know, took the online classes because they intended to. And so obviously we did not apply that charge this spring as we made the transition. We continue to provide instruction. The modality changed, and we continue to provide the same resources to our students. So the library continued to support our students, our counseling supported our students, advising continued to support our students. And so we will not be issuing an additional reimbursement to our students because the nature of the instruction changed for the spring semester.
We do have a new question, probably for Provost Cordle. And that question is, can the deadline for submitting spring grades be extended? And if I'm not mistaken, that deadline is probably next Tuesday.
Yes, that deadline would be next Tuesday. Honestly, I don't think there has been any discussion on that subject, at least none that I've been a part of so far. You know, the thing about the deadline for submitting grades is I know that it can be a press for instructors, particularly those who have exams and final projects that are due very late this week, maybe at the end of the week. But what we've always found in the past is that any consideration of extending that deadline triggers a number of other challenges, particularly for students who very much need for us to get grades posted so they can move on with their lives and have transcriptive courses to do what their next step might ever call for. So it's a little hard to see that we would be doing that just because we found always in the past, it's hard to do it without causing other problems.
And I will say that I am impressed. We have almost 180 people on this, but we actually have reached the end of all of the questions that were already submitted. So I would remind people that you do have the Q&A function on your toolbar. If you do have some more questions that you would like to ask, we do have a few more minutes.
Well, and I do see one question, and this has to do with outside external events during the month of June. And I would just note, I don't believe we actually show anything on the university calendar that is an outside external event during the month of June. June, I think, will be a tricky month because we're still obviously going through the 4 phases of the governor's plan and whatever local guidance we may have here. And if that questioner would have additional questions, I would invite a discussion with maybe Dr. Williams about an outside event sometime in the month of June. One of the things that has been true for us is that if it's truly external, meaning it's an event that's being put on by a group other than Emporia State, we have been very diligent in asking them for specifics as to their plan to keep the attendees at their event safe. And so that would be a part of the question or the answer to the question. So I would invite that questioner to please reach out to Dr. Williams if more information is needed.
So we do have some questions coming in. The first one is, will you publish a list of the members of the fall planning group?
I am happy to do that. We have a couple of additional members because this is a group that is relatively new. Obviously, up until just recently, we were continuing to look toward fall, but we were doing that through the emergency planning group. So now it's been kind of renamed and reconfigured a bit. And so I'll be happy to do that once the membership is final. And we are, I think, fairly close to that being final.
Okay. Do you have an estimate when staff will start returning to campus?
We have not yet determined when staff will begin returning to campus, but we did commit to staff that we will let you know at least a week ahead of time. And if that creates problems for you or you have childcare concerns, please do reach out to your supervisor.
Okay. We have a couple more questions related to residential life. One is that although the fraternity and sorority housing is considered off campus, this chapter plans to follow the lead from ESU residential life. Do you think that's an appropriate plan?
Well, I would just mention that all of the different Greek chapters do have national offices, and their national offices may also be providing some guidance. And so they would want to, in addition to maybe talking to our residence life staff, talk to their national office to see what guidance is being provided. And then, of course, they'll pay attention to the federal, state, and local guidance as well. But I do think talking with our residence life staff would be helpful for those who are involved in the Greek system here at Emporia State.
And this person is wondering, is the work continuing on Abigail Hall to be able to open when we come back?
Well, the latest I've heard is that that is still happening. So that's what we're hopeful for this fall. And that will be a beautiful addition to our campus.
We have several employees wondering, because they have heard news stories that K-State has furloughed many employees. Is there a chance or a plan for something like that happening at Emporia State?
Well, Emporia State will be doing another town hall here in the next few weeks where we'll talk with our employees. I think most of our employees are aware that as the semester began, we recognized that we had budget deficit that we needed to make up. And I know that there's been hard work occurring over the summer toward that end. We are not ready to make an announcement at this time, but hope to communicate further with our employees here in the next couple of weeks.
This question goes back to classroom instruction and might be more appropriate for Provost Cordle. And that is a question of whether instructors will be required to wear masks as they deliver lectures. The person asking the question is actually in favor of being extremely careful, but wondering how difficult it's going to be to deliver a lecture through a mask.
That's a great question. I could imagine that being a little bit difficult. You know, I think probably that one in the end is not going to be so much an academic decision, but rather one of those decisions that folds into the larger question of what kind of practices that we will need to employ as we return to campus. And that in turn, I think, tracks very closely to the guidance that we get from our local and state and national leadership and the guidance we receive from healthcare professionals about what the best practices are at any given time.
Okay. And once again, we've answered all of your questions. I would say if no one has any other questions, I'm going to turn it back over to President Garrett.
I want to thank our moderator today. I want to thank Provost Cordle and our friends in IT who helped us set this up. And I want to thank all of you for joining in today as we talked about what the future looks like for Emporia State in the fall. You know, the truth is we don't have all the answers yet, but we do have a fantastic team here at Emporia State. We've got a number of groups throughout campus who are working hard on coming up with the specific processes and procedures that we will need in every area of campus. Because at its heart, a college campus really is a small city. And so we are very fortunate to have those individuals working for Emporia State. And I want to say thank you to our students again. We are grateful to you for everything that you've done. I know this semester has been a very different sort of semester. We are excited to welcome you back onto campus in the fall. Thank you.